Alright, I'm going to start a tutorial on equivalent unit computation. I think this might help some of you. Let's assume that we've got a furniture manufacturer and it's a process costing environment, and there are two departments. First the assembly department and then the finishing department. We're going to start with the assembly department first, since that's the first process in the manufacturing company. So in assembly, they're going to give us some information. We've got no beginning balance of work in process, so 0 units. During the month, we started 1,600 units. We completed and transferred out 1,400 units, and the ending balance of work in process is 200 units, and they're 70% complete. We're going to translate that into some of the terminology that is used in the lesson. So there are 3 categories of units, right? So right now we're only tracking the units. Your lesson talks about the A units, the B units, and the C units. So A units relate to the beginning balance of work in process and computing the equivalent units for those units that had to be finished in a given month. The B units are the started and completed. So we categorize those because we want to be able to track all of the units that 100% received all of the materials and all of the conversion costs for the period. And then we categorize as C the ending balance in work in process units. So for this problem, there were no units in the beginning balance of work in process, so there's 0 equivalent units for A. In B, there were 1,600 units started and 1,400 units transferred out, so the ones that were started and finished are only the 1,400 units. And then that's where the 200 ending work in process units come in. If we started 1,600 but only finished 14, and there was no beginning inventory of work in process, then 1,400 were started and completed, and that leaves us 200 units that are in the ending balance of work in process. So let's recap what the equivalent units are for the assembly department. We've got 0 for A because of no beginning balance in WIP. For B, we have 1,400 units that were started and completed, so they would be 100% started and completed for materials and 100% started and completed for conversion. And then the C units, we have ending balance of 200 units that are in process, but they're only 70% complete. So equivalently, it would have been like we would have been able to put all the work into 70% of the 200, or 1,400, 140 are the equivalent units in that C category. Now, how does that then feed into the next department, which is the finishing department? So let's look at a recap of the assembly and then what's going to be happening in the finishing department. So in finishing, we had some beginning balance of work in process units, 200 units, and they were 40% complete. Then during the period, we started 1,400 units, and where did they come from? They were the completed units from the assembly department transferring into the finishing department. So we started 1,400. Over the period, we completed 1,300, and at the end, we have ending balance of work in process of 300 units, and they happen to be 25% complete with respect to finishing. So let's compute the equivalent units for the finishing department. So the A units, we had 200 units, and they were 40% complete at the beginning of the period. So our focus has to be on how much work did we do this month to finish them. So if we had 40% complete before, then we had to do 60% of the work this period. So the A units would be 120 units, 200 times the 60% of the work that we had to do this period. So the A units would be 120 equivalent units. Started and completed. Well, we completed 1,300 units. Of those 1,300 units, we had some that we had to finish from the beginning balance. So 1,300 minus the 200 leaves really 1,100 units that were started and completed. We didn't have to worry about this in the assembly department because there was no work in process from the beginning of the period. But here, if we finished 1,300 but 200 were in process, then we would have finished those 200 first, meaning the started and completed can only be 1,100 units. And then in category C, if we had 300 units, but they were 25% complete, equivalently, that's like starting and finishing 75 units. So the equivalent units in the finishing department would be 120 in category A, 1100 in category B, and 75 in category C. I'm going to whip up another one of these brief tutorials and track the dollars and show you the cost per equivalent unit computation shortly. I hope you find this helpful.